Hello, welcome to Fabulous Food. Today we're going to be making a raspberry and coconut slice. So I've put my oven on 170 degrees and now I'm going to weigh the ingredients ready for my pastry. So I'm going to put my bowl on my scales and set them to 0. And then I'm going to weigh in 200 grams of plain flour. It's 200 grams of plain flour, a pinch of salt and 100 grams of margarine. So I set my scales back to 0 and then I weigh in my marge. Bit too much. There, 100 grams of margarine. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my bowl off my scales so I don't break my scales, and I'm going to rub my margarine into my flour to make fine breadcrumbs. You can start it off by just chopping in with a knife. That just spreads the butter and margarine through the flour a bit before you start. And then I'm going to put my hands in. So you remember, you use the tips of your fingers and your thumb and you just gently break the margarine down. Make sure you've got lots of flour on your fingers all the time. Use your fingers to go right to the bottom of the bowl and keep going until you have fine breadcrumbs. When you think you're nearly there, if you give your bowl a bit of a shake, it will bring any big lumps of yellow margarine to the front, to the top of the bowl. Break up the big lumps. They might just be flour and margarine already rubbed together, which mine are. So I've got fine breadcrumbs there, and now I'm going to add 3 to 4 tablespoons of very cold water and use my knife to bring the pastry together. So I'll put 3 tablespoons in to start with. 1, 2, 3, and then I can add another one if I need it. And just stir that in with your knife. Yeah, I'm definitely going to need another one. So I put the 4th one in now. And then keep mixing. And it should begin to come together, begin to look a bit sticky. And once you get to that stage, you're going to put your hands into the bowl, just one hand actually, and bring it together into a ball, like this. So you use the ball that you have created to pick up all the dry bits around the edge of the bowl. Some slightly wetter bits on your fingers, so make sure you scrape those off. And then one final go around the bowl, dip it out, and then just bring it together with your hands and give it a gentle knead. So you can see that it still looks as if it's crumbling, but actually it's quite sticky and it's going to be fine. There. So you might want to go and wash your hands at this point, and then we'll start rolling out. So before you start rolling out, have a look at the size of your tin. I've got a tin here that I've lined with baking parchment. Now you wouldn't normally line a tin with parchment if you were going to cook pastry in it, because pastry won't stick. But because we have to lift your tarts or slices out of the school tins, we always make sure we line them for you. So that's the size I'm aiming for. You need to have a little bit of flour down on the worktop to stop the pastry sticking. And then just gently shape it into an oblong or a rectangle shape before you start, and that will encourage it to roll into the right shape. And then very gently, 2 rolls, didn't press down very hard, wiggle it just to make sure there's a bit of flour, turn it round, 2 rolls, wiggle it, turn it round, square it off a little bit, 1, 2, and then you just keep going until it's the right shape and size for your tin. You might need to put a little bit more flour onto the surface of the pastry if it's getting sticky. Right, so I think I'm there now. If I get my tin and pop it on top of the pastry. It covers the base and there's plenty to go up the sides as well, so I know that's going to be fine. So then I'm just going to lift it, make sure it's not stuck onto the worktop, and pop it into the tin like that, and then just encourage it to sit up the sides of the tin all the way round like that, popping it into the corners. It will be a little bit too big, I should think. It's always a good idea to roll it too big rather than too small, but we can trim that off later on, so that doesn't matter. So that's your pastry case made like that. There we are. And now we're going to put 3 tablespoons of raspberry jam into the bottom of that pastry case. So give your jam a bit of a stir so it doesn't come out in one big lump. And put the 3 tablespoons in across the pastry, not all in one big blob. And then just very gently with your spoon so you don't break the pastry, spread the jam around its base. Make sure you're pressing down all the time and not lifting the pastry up. Get it into the corners, all around the edges, so everybody gets some jam. There we are. So now we're ready to make the sponge to go on top of the base. Right, so I've had a bit of a tidy up and a clean down, which we'll get you to do as well. And now I'm going to make my sponge. So bowl back on the scales, set them to 0, and we're simply going to weigh in all of the ingredients. So we start off with 150 grams of caster sugar. And the next ingredient is 50 grams of desiccated coconut, which comes in a little packet like that. So set my scales back to 0 and put 50 grams of coconut in. Set my scales back to 0, put 150 grams of margarine in. My scales to 0 again and put 100 grams of self-raising flour in. And then I want half a teaspoon of baking powder to help the sponge to rise. So it's half a level teaspoon like that. And the last ingredient is 2 large eggs, which I don't need to weigh. So I'll take that off the scales and I'm going to crack my eggs into a jug first. It's easier to take any shell out if we do that. 1, 2. Give them a gentle whisk with a fork just to break the yolks down, like that. And then pour them into the bowl. So we've got all of our ingredients in there ready now, and we're going to use an electric mixer to whisk them together. So here's the mixer. We use these in school, and you want to start off on a slow speed so we don't spray all the ingredients over the room. So I'm just going to gently mix the egg into the dry ingredients to start with, and that will help not make quite such a mess. And then just switch it to number 1. It's going to get a bit noisy, so just watch what happens in the bowl. So just work your way round, get all the margarine incorporated, and then I'm going to go on to a higher speed just to whisk everything together well. There, that's all it took to whisk the ingredients together. Press the button on the top of the whisk, get the whisks out, and then we're going to get our tin back. We've got our sponge mix here, and we've got our raspberries ready to put on the top so we don't forget. So I'm going to use a spatula to scrape round the bowl. So if you just go round first of all and encourage the mix to the bottom, get it all together. And then we're going to put dollops of this all over the surface, not going to put it in one place, and then we don't have to spread it so far. I'll move it where you can see. Make sure you scrape your bowl really well with the spatula. We don't want to waste any mixture. Yeah, that's how clean I got my bowl. And then I'm just going to use a fork just to tease the sponge to the edges, make sure all of the jam is covered so that it's not going to bubble up through any gaps. So take your time with that. That looks okay to me. There, so that's the top of my tart. Another clean up. Now I'm going to sprinkle the raspberries over the top. You can either place them in a pattern like this, which I tend to do. I think Mrs. Halloran would just tend to scatter them like this. So it's really up to you the kind of effect that you want to go for. But just make sure that everybody's going to get at least one raspberry when you cut it up. There. Press them in a little bit because we don't want them just to burn on the top. And then the last thing is to sprinkle over the remaining 25 grams of coconut. So I've got mine weighed out in a little bowl here, and I'm just going to sprinkle it all over. Again, making sure that everybody's going to get a little bit and that the surface of your cake sponge is covered. Look like that. And I just need to tidy up the pastry now because it's a little bit too long. I'm just going to cut all the way around the edges like this to tidy it up. Now that's ready to go into my oven at 170 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes. So I've just taken my raspberry and coconut slice out of the oven, and it actually did need the full 30 minutes to cook. I hope you enjoy making this recipe, and we'll see you in the classroom. Bye bye.